She wasn't supposed to open her eyes. But she did. And when she whispered, "Please, don't tell them I can see," the whole mansion stopped breathing. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'll be giving you another story just as wild as this one. Now, back to our story. Everyone believed the millionaire's daughter had been born completely blind. For years, no one questioned it, not the doctors, not the staff, not even her father, Thomas Carrington. She lived in isolation, hidden away in a mansion filled with whispers and polished secrets. But everything changed the day Maya Brooks arrived. She wasn't an ophthalmologist or a specialist, just a maid who noticed what others refused to see. What she observed during her quiet work around the estate would unravel years of deception, challenge a powerful corporation, and expose a truth that had been buried since the day little Grace was born. What started as a housekeeping job became a mission for justice, and what Maya uncovered would shock everyone, especially the tech mogul who thought he was protecting his only child. Thomas Carrington was a visionary in the technology world, known for creating revolutionary smart vision software that changed how computers processed visual information. But behind his perfect reputation, he lived a very different life at home. He resided in a vast, lonely estate on Connecticut's wealthy shoreline where he lived as a ghost, alone with his 8-year-old daughter Grace. The mansion was elegant with soaring windows and pristine hallways, but darkness clung to every corner, as if light itself was forbidden. Thomas had lost his wife Vivian under mysterious circumstances years ago, shortly after Grace was born. That tragedy broke something inside him. He withdrew from the world, not because he craved solitude, but because he couldn't bear the weight of his past. His entire existence now revolved around Grace. She was his redemption, and he accepted her blindness as punishment for secrets he refused to discuss. Despite the mansion being equipped with every possible accommodation for a blind child, Grace remained distant and withdrawn. Thomas had consulted specialists from across the globe, hoping someone could offer hope, but the diagnosis never changed. Grace rarely spoke. She didn't play. She didn't laugh. Most days, she sat motionless by the window, her pale, unfocused eyes staring into nothingness. It was as if she existed in a world between worlds, one that no one else could access. Thomas often watched her from across the room, drowning in helplessness. He'd read medical journals to her, sometimes play classical music, even describe the ocean view outside her window, but she rarely responded. Only occasionally would her head tilt slightly or her fingers twitch, and those tiny movements were all he had to cling to. He wondered constantly if she even knew he was there or if she felt anything at all. At 45, Thomas looked far older than his years. The burden of his guilt had aged him prematurely. His once sharp features now appeared hollow, and his eyes carried the permanent shadow of someone haunted by the past. His movements were deliberate, cautious, like a man afraid of disturbing invisible ghosts. Then came Maya Brooks, 30 years old, resilient, and carrying her own invisible wounds. After losing her child in a house fire in Detroit, she'd come to Connecticut searching for a fresh start. Grief still haunted her eyes, but her steady heart and quiet discipline had earned her a position at the Carrington estate. She had no idea that crossing that threshold would change everything. From the moment Maya met Grace, something felt off. The child's eyes, though pale and unfocused, seemed strangely alive. And on her third day, while opening the curtains to dust the windowsills, Maya noticed something impossible. Grace flinched at the sudden brightness. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there. A reaction to light that no truly blind person should have. That single moment would set in motion a chain of events that would expose a conspiracy reaching far beyond the mansion's walls, one that had kept an innocent child imprisoned in artificial darkness for reasons Maya couldn't yet imagine. Maya learned quickly that the Carrington household operated on unspoken rules. Curtains remained drawn. Voices stayed hushed. Even footsteps seemed muted against the marble floors, as if the mansion itself demanded silence. But it was the rule about Grace that struck her most. No one disturbed the routine surrounding the child's condition. On her second week, Maya was assigned to clean Grace's quarters while the girl sat in her usual spot by the window. The room was beautiful but sterile, expensive toys arranged with mathematical precision, books on shelves that had never been touched. Maya worked quietly, dusting shelves and straightening items, when she noticed Grace's head turning slightly toward the sound of her movements. "Would you like me to read to you?" Maya asked softly, not expecting a response. Grace remained still, but her fingers twitched against the armrest of her chair. Maya took it as permission. She selected a book from the shelf, a collection of fairy tales with embossed covers, and sat on the floor near Grace's feet. "My son loved this one," Maya said, her voice catching slightly. "The story about the nightingale." She began reading, her voice low and melodic. The tale unfolded, an emperor who preferred a mechanical bird to a real one, until illness taught him the value of authentic beauty. As Maya read, she noticed Grace's breathing change, becoming deeper, more attentive. When she finished, the room fell silent again. "Would you like to touch the book?" Maya asked. "The cover has raised patterns." Hesitantly, she took Grace's small hand and guided it to the embossed nightingale on the cover. The child's fingers traced the outline with unexpected precision. Not random movements, Maya noted, but deliberate exploration. Over the next few days, Maya established a quiet ritual. She'd clean Grace's room, then read for 15 minutes. Each time, she'd bring something different for Grace to touch: a seashell from the beach, a satin ribbon, a small music box. The girl never spoke, but her responsiveness grew. She would reach for objects before Maya fully extended them, her timing too perfect for someone who couldn't see. One afternoon, while polishing the silver in the dining room, Maya noticed Grace sitting alone at the massive table. Thomas was away at meetings, and the nurse had stepped out. Maya continued working, the soft cloth making circular motions against a silver candlestick. Sunlight broke through the clouds outside, sending a bright reflection off the polished surface. Grace's head turned, directly toward the flash of light. Maya froze. It wasn't the first time she'd noticed such a reaction. 3 days ago, Grace had flinched when Maya opened the curtains. Yesterday, the girl had reached toward the glint of Maya's necklace pendant when it caught the light. Small moments, easily dismissed by others, but forming a pattern Maya couldn't ignore. "You can see something, can't you?" she whispered, more to herself than to Grace. The girl remained motionless, but Maya sensed a tension in her posture, as if she were listening intently. That evening, Thomas joined Grace for dinner, a rare occurrence since Maya had arrived. She served them silently, observing their interaction. Thomas spoke gently to his daughter, describing his day in careful, simple terms, though his eyes rarely met hers. There was tenderness in his voice, but also something else, a heaviness that seemed to press him into his chair. "Grace had a good day," Maya ventured during a pause. "She seemed to enjoy the music box I showed her." Thomas looked up, surprised by her initiative. "Music box?" "Yes, sir. A small one with a ballerina that spins." She followed it with her fingers. A shadow crossed his face. "That's very kind of you, but please remember that Grace's therapy regimen is carefully structured. Any changes should be discussed with her nurse first." "Of course, Mr. Carrington. I apologize." After dinner, Maya overheard Thomas speaking with Nurse Evelyn in his study. Their voices were low, but tension carried through the closed door. "Unnecessary attachments," Evelyn was saying. "Dr. Cross was very specific about limiting stimulation." "I know what the doctor said," Thomas replied, his voice strained. "But she's been on the medication for years with no improvement. Sometimes I wonder if—" "Mr. Carrington," Evelyn cut in sharply, "questioning the treatment now won't help Grace. You signed the consent forms. You agreed to the protocol." Maya moved away before they could notice her, but the exchange lodged in her mind. Medication? Protocol? The words suggested something more calculated than care. That night, rain lashed against the windows of the mansion. Thunder rolled across the sky, illuminating the hallways in brief, ghostly flashes. Maya couldn't sleep. The conversation she'd overheard played on repeat in her thoughts. Rising from bed, she wrapped herself in a robe and walked the silent corridors. The mansion felt different at night, less a home than a museum of secrets. Family portraits lined the walls, including one of a beautiful woman Maya assumed was Vivian Carrington. In the painting, she stood beside Thomas, both smiling, her hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. They looked happy, unburdened. What had happened to transform that joy into this mausoleum of whispers? A flash of lightning illuminated the hallway, and Maya noticed Grace's door ajar. Peering inside, she saw the girl sitting upright in bed, face turned toward the window as lightning fractured the sky. Maya entered quietly. "Are you afraid of the storm?" Grace didn't respond, but her fingers clutched the bedsheet tightly. "I used to tell my son that thunder was just the clouds playing bowling," Maya said, sitting gently on the edge of the bed. "The lightning is when they get a strike." For the briefest moment, Grace's lips twitched, almost a smile. Maya's heart leapt at the response. Another flash lit the room, and in that instant, Maya saw something impossible. Grace's pupils contracted sharply against the sudden brightness, then dilated again in darkness. An involuntary physiological response that shouldn't exist in someone truly blind. Maya's mind raced. She'd noticed the reactions before, but this was undeniable. Blind eyes don't respond to light. It was basic medicine, something even she knew without medical training. The next morning, Maya arrived early to the kitchen, her night's sleep broken and fitful. Mrs. Porter, the cook, was already preparing breakfast. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the older woman remarked. "Just the storm," Maya replied, then hesitated. "Mrs. Porter, how long have you worked for the Carringtons?" "Going on 12 years now. Since before Miss Grace was born." "And she's been blind the whole time?" Mrs. Porter's hands paused over the dough she was kneading. "That's what the doctors say. Poor child. Mr. Carrington spent a fortune trying to find treatments, especially after Mrs. Carrington passed. Flew in specialists from everywhere." "What happened to Mrs. Carrington exactly?" The cook's expression darkened. "Accident, they said. Though there were rumors." She shook her head. "Not my place to gossip. But she was asking questions about some of Mr. Carrington's business partners right before. Especially that Dr. Cross who's always visiting." "Dr. Cross? The eye specialist. Still comes by once a month to check on Grace and adjust her medications." Mrs. Porter lowered her voice. "Between us, I never liked him. Cold eyes, that one. Like he's calculating something whenever he looks at you." Throughout the day, Maya watched Grace more carefully. During lunch, she deliberately dropped a spoon near the girl's chair. Grace's head turned toward the sound, but a fraction of a second before the metal hit the floor, as if she'd seen it falling. That afternoon, while Grace napped and the house staff was occupied with preparations for a business associate's visit, Maya slipped into the bathroom connected to the master bedroom. The medicine cabinet contained ordinary items: aspirin, bandages, shaving cream. But in the back corner sat a small locked box. Using a hairpin, Maya managed to open it after several tense minutes. Inside were 3 unmarked bottles of eye drops. The label bore only a serial number and Dr. Leonard Cross's name. No instructions, no pharmacy information, nothing to indicate what the medication actually was. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her cousin Erin, a medical researcher in Boston. "Found something on that doctor you asked about. Call me when you can." Maya's heart raced. She carefully replaced the box and slipped out of the room. That evening, after finishing her duties, Maya retreated to her small quarters in the staff wing. Rain had started again, providing a blanket of sound that would mask her conversation. She called Erin. "What did you find?" she asked without preamble. "Maya, this guy is bad news," Erin's voice crackled through the phone. "Dr. Leonard Cross was involved in a pharmaceutical scandal 5 years ago. Experimental drugs, falsified results. Nothing stuck legally, but he lost his hospital privileges. Now he works exclusively for private clients and Visionary Pharmaceuticals." Visionary? That's one of Thomas Carrington's companies, isn't it? Subsidiary, yes. They're developing drugs for neurological disorders, including visual processing conditions. Cross leads their clinical research division. Maya's mind raced, connecting fragments like pieces of a shattered mirror. Erin, if someone wanted to make a seeing person appear blind, could they do it? Medically? A pause. Theoretically, yes. Certain compounds could suppress visual processing or pupillary response without causing permanent damage. But that would be highly unethical, possibly criminal. "I need to be sure," Maya whispered. "I need proof." After ending the call, Maya sat in darkness, weighing her next move. If she was wrong, she'd lose her job, possibly face legal consequences. If she was right, she couldn't bear to fully consider the implications. The next day moved with excruciating slowness. Maya performed her duties mechanically, her mind elsewhere. When evening came, she volunteered to bring Grace her dinner, carrying a tray to the girls' room where she sat in her usual spot by the window. Maya set down the tray and closed the door behind her. From her pocket, she removed her phone. "Grace," she said softly, "I'm going to try something, okay? It won't hurt." The girl remained still as Maya approached. Carefully, Maya activated her phone's flashlight and from an angle where the nurse monitoring the hallway wouldn't see, directed the beam toward Grace's face. The reaction was immediate and undeniable. Grace's pupils contracted sharply, her eyelids flinching at the sudden brightness. Not the random movements of a blind child, but the precise, involuntary response of functioning eyes. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The phone nearly slipped from her trembling fingers. "Oh my God," she whispered. Grace's hand suddenly shot out, gripping Maya's wrist with surprising strength. For the first time, the girl turned her face directly toward Maya's, her pale blue eyes focusing with frightening clarity. "Please," Grace whispered, her voice rusty from disuse, "don't tell them I can see." The words hung in the air between them, a confession that changed everything. Maya stared at the child, her mind struggling to process the impossible truth. Grace's eyes, focused, alert, afraid, looked directly into hers. "Who is them?" Maya asked softly, kneeling to Grace's level. "Who are you afraid of?" But the moment shattered as the door opened. Nurse Evelyn stood in the doorway, her thin frame silhouetted against the hallway light. "What's going on in here?" Her gaze darted between Maya and Grace, then fixed on the phone in Maya's hand, its flashlight still glowing. Grace's hand dropped from Maya's wrist. Her eyes unfocused instantly, returning to their vacant stare. The transformation was so complete, so practiced, that Maya might have doubted what she just witnessed if not for the echo of the girl's words still ringing in her ears. "I was just checking if Grace had finished her dinner," Maya said, slipping her phone into her pocket. Nurse Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "That's not your responsibility. Please remember your place in this household, Ms. Brooks." The following morning, Maya sought out Nurse Evelyn in the medication room. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to appear calm. "May I speak with you about Grace?" she asked. Evelyn looked up from the medication chart she was reviewing. "What about her?" "I've noticed some things that suggest she might have some visual perception. Yesterday, she reacted to light. Her pupils contracted." Evelyn's face remained impassive, but her fingers tightened around her pen. "That's a common reflex in many blind people. It doesn't indicate functional vision." "But what if—" "Ms. Brooks," Evelyn interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper, "Mr. Carrington doesn't entertain false hope. Grace's condition has been thoroughly diagnosed by specialists since birth. These amateur observations only make things harder for everyone, especially her father." "But if there's even a chance—" "There isn't." Evelyn's tone hardened. "And I strongly suggest you focus on your cleaning duties rather than playing doctor. People who stir up trouble in this house don't tend to last long." The warning was clear. Maya nodded and retreated, but her resolve only strengthened. She thought of Grace's whispered plea, the fear in her eyes. Something was deeply wrong in the Carrington mansion, and she couldn't turn away now. That night, Maya lay awake in her small room, weighing her options. If she reported her suspicions to Thomas, would he listen? Or was he somehow complicit? The nurse's warning echoed in her mind. People who stir up trouble in this house don't tend to last long. What did that mean? Had others noticed before her? What had happened to them? She needed evidence, something concrete that couldn't be dismissed as the imagination of an overstepping maid. The next day, Thomas left for a business trip to New York. The house fell into a different rhythm during his absences, slightly more relaxed but also more watchful. Maya used the opportunity to observe Grace more carefully. She noticed how the girl's head would track movement when she thought no one was watching. How she would reach for objects with too much precision for someone navigating by touch alone. On the third day of Thomas's absence, Maya was assigned to clean his private bathroom. As she worked, she examined the medicine cabinet more thoroughly. Behind a stack of towels, she discovered a small case containing several unmarked bottles of eye drops. Each bore only a serial number and Dr. Leonard Cross's name, identical to the one she'd found earlier. Carefully, she photographed one with her phone, making sure to capture the label clearly. Then she replaced everything exactly as she'd found it. That evening, after finishing her duties, Maya sat in her room with her laptop, searching for information on Dr. Leonard Cross. The first results were impressive: Harvard Medical School, pioneering research in neurological ophthalmology, prestigious awards. But as she dug deeper, troubling patterns emerged. 3 years ago, Cross had been quietly removed from a research hospital after questions arose about his experimental treatments. No formal charges were filed, but several families had attempted lawsuits that were quickly settled out of court with strict confidentiality agreements. One article, buried deep in search results, mentioned ethical concerns regarding pediatric trials and questions about informed consent. Maya found a connection to Visionary Pharmaceuticals, a subsidiary of Carrington Technologies that specialized in neurological medications. Cross now served as their head of clinical research. The company was developing a drug called occludin, designed to treat certain types of seizures by temporarily suppressing visual processing pathways in the brain. A chill ran through her. Temporary suppression of visual processing. Could that be what was happening to Grace? She sent the photos of the eye drops to her cousin Erin with an urgent message: "Need to know what this is. Life or death." The next morning, Maya noticed something different about the mansion. The security cameras in the hallways seemed to track her movements more deliberately. Nurse Evelyn appeared whenever Maya spent time with Grace, watching their interactions with suspicious eyes. During lunch preparation, Mrs. Porter pulled her aside. "Be careful, girl," the cook whispered. "Evelyn was in Mr. Carrington's office this morning, going through the security footage. She asked me strange questions about you." Maya's stomach tightened. What kind of questions? "About your background, your references, whether you'd been snooping around." Mrs. Porter squeezed her arm. "Whatever you're doing, watch yourself. This house has secrets that bite." That afternoon, while delivering fresh towels to Thomas's study, Maya noticed his computer was unlocked, unusual for the security-conscious tech mogul. A notification flashed on the screen: Dr. Cross meeting reminder, Grace's quarterly assessment, tomorrow 10 a.m. Acting on impulse, Maya glanced at the door, then quickly opened the desk drawer. Inside was a folder labeled Grace Carrington Medical Protocol. She snapped hasty photos of several pages, consent forms, treatment schedules, and clinical notes, before carefully replacing everything and slipping out. Later, alone in her room, she examined the photos. The documents detailed a visual suppression protocol using a compound called OC-137, apparently the contents of the eye drops. According to the notes, the medication temporarily inhibited visual processing by suppressing optic nerve signals to the brain. The effects lasted approximately 12 hours per dose. Most disturbing was a consent form signed by Thomas 5 years ago, authorizing Grace's participation in a longitudinal study of neurological adaptation to visual impairment. The language was complex, full of medical jargon that would confuse anyone without specialized training. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Erin: "This compound is experimental. Not FDA approved. Temporarily blocks visual signals to brain. Why is a child getting this? Call me now." Before Maya could respond, another message appeared: also, found lawsuit buried in court records. Family claimed Cross used their child as test subject without proper consent. Case disappeared from system. Maya's hands trembled. The pieces were falling into place: a pharmaceutical company testing an experimental drug, a child being deliberately kept blind, a grieving father who might not understand what he had authorized. The next morning, Thomas returned from his trip. Maya watched from the window as his sleek black car pulled into the circular driveway. Dr. Cross arrived shortly after, a tall, thin man with silver hair and cold eyes. They disappeared into Thomas's study for over an hour. Maya continued her duties, her mind racing with what she'd discovered. She needed to confront Thomas, but how? Would he believe her? Was he even aware of what was happening to his daughter? Her opportunity came sooner than expected. That afternoon, while Grace was scheduled for her therapy session with Dr. Cross, Maya slipped into the girls' room to straighten the bedding. She didn't expect Grace to return so quickly. The door opened, and Grace entered alone, moving with the careful steps she always used when adults were nearby. But once the door closed, her posture changed. She walked directly to the window seat without hesitation, her movements precise and confident. Grace, Maya said softly. It's just me. The girl turned, her eyes finding Maya's face immediately. They gave me the drops again, she whispered. It will get foggy soon. Maya approached slowly, kneeling beside her. How long have you been able to see? Always, Grace said. But they don't know. Only when the medicine wears off at night. Doctor. Cross says I'm helping other children, but... Her voice trembled. I don't want to be blind anymore. Maya took the girl's small hands in hers. Listen to me, Grace. What they're doing is wrong. Your father needs to know the truth. He'll be angry. Maybe at first. But he loves you. Grace's eyes suddenly widened, focusing on something behind Maya. Before she could turn, Thomas's voice cut through the room like ice. What exactly are you doing? Maya stood, her heart pounding. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. Behind him loomed Dr. Cross, watching the scene with clinical detachment. Mr. Carrington, Maya began, there's something you need to know about Grace. You've overstepped your boundaries for the last time, Thomas interrupted. I've been informed of your inappropriate behavior, questioning Grace's medical care, interfering with her treatment routine. It's not treatment, Maya said firmly. It's experimentation. Those drops are suppressing her vision, not helping her. Thomas's face darkened. You have no idea what you're talking about. Grace has been blind since birth. These treatments are to prevent seizures, not. That's not true, Daddy, Grace's small voice cut through the tension. All eyes turned to her. In the silence that followed, Grace stood from the window seat. With deliberate steps, she walked directly to her father, not the cautious shuffle of a blind child, but the confident stride of someone who could see perfectly well. I can see you, she said, reaching up to touch his face. I can see you when the medicine wears off. I pretend because Dr. Cross said I have to, but I'm tired of pretending. Thomas stared at his daughter in shock. Dr. Cross stepped forward. Mr. Carrington, the child is confused. This is a common side effect of. Prove it, Maya challenged Grace gently. Show your father what you can see. Before anyone could stop her, Maya pulled her phone from her pocket and turned on the flashlight, directing it toward Grace's face. The girl didn't flinch or turn away. Instead, her pupils contracted sharply, responding perfectly to the sudden brightness. I saw the light, Daddy, Grace said, her voice breaking. Then, in a whisper that shattered the last of Thomas's denial, I saw the light. Mama used to say I had her eyes. The color drained from Thomas's face. He stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Then his gaze shifted to Dr. Cross, comprehension and rage dawning simultaneously. What have you done to my child? He whispered. Dr. Cross maintained his professional composure, but his eyes darted toward the door. Mr. Carrington, you signed the consent forms. The protocol has been in place for years. Your daughter's participation has been invaluable to our research. Research. Thomas's voice rose. You told me these drops were preventing seizures, protecting her brain from damage. A necessary simplification, Cross replied coldly. The compound's effects on developing visual pathways are groundbreaking. The data we've gathered from Grace has advanced our understanding by decades. Thomas staggered slightly, gripping the doorframe for support. The full horror of what had been done, what he had unknowingly permitted, crashed over him in waves. Get out, he whispered, then louder, get out of my house. Dr. Cross straightened his jacket. I'll remind you that our contract is void, Thomas finished, his voice deadly quiet. And if you're not off my property in 5 minutes, I'll have security throw you out. After Cross departed, Thomas fell to his knees before Grace. His hands trembled as he reached for her, afraid to touch her, as if she might dissolve like a dream. Can you really see me? He asked, his voice breaking. Grace nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Not all the time. The medicine makes everything foggy. But at night, when it wears off. I see the stars, Daddy. Thomas gathered his daughter in his arms, his body shaking with silent sobs. Over Grace's shoulder, his eyes met Maya's, filled with gratitude, horror, and dawning determination. What have I allowed them to do? He whispered. Maya watched father and daughter clinging to each other, the truth finally exposed to the light. The battle wasn't over. Powerful interests would fight to keep their secrets buried, but the first and hardest step had been taken. Grace could see. And now, so could Thomas. The morning after Dr. Cross's departure, a different atmosphere permeated the Carrington mansion. Thomas had dismissed Nurse Evelyn immediately, her protests silenced by a single cold glance. The unmarked bottles of eye drops were collected and locked away as evidence. And for the first time in years, all the curtains in Grace's room were drawn wide open, allowing sunlight to flood every corner. Grace sat in the center of this light, blinking frequently, her eyes watering from the unaccustomed brightness. The medication would take time to fully leave her system. Dr. Cross had warned of this during his hasty exit. A final clinical observation offered as security escorted him from the property. It might be overwhelming at first, Maya cautioned, sitting beside Grace on the window seat. Your eyes need time to adjust. Thomas stood nearby, watching his daughter with a mixture of wonder and devastation. Every blink, every small movement of Grace's eyes as they tracked dust motes floating in the sunbeams was both miracle and accusation. How had he not seen? How had he allowed this to happen? Can you tell what color this is? Maya asked gently, holding up a red silk scarf. Grace squinted, her brow furrowing with concentration. Red, she ventured hesitantly. Like the roses in the garden. Thomas made a small wounded sound. Grace had never been allowed in the garden. The roses had been Vivian's pride, maintained after her death as a memorial. Yet somehow, his daughter knew they existed, knew their color. That's right, Maya confirmed, smiling. And this one? She held up a blue cotton handkerchief. Blue, Grace said more confidently. Like the sky. Throughout that first day, Grace's vision fluctuated, moments of clarity followed by periods of blurriness as the compound slowly worked its way out of her system. By evening, she could identify larger objects across the room, though details remained fuzzy. The transformation was both gradual and miraculous. That night, after Grace had fallen asleep, Thomas invited Maya to his study. The room was different now, the heavy curtains pulled back, moonlight spilling across the antique desk. A glass of whiskey sat untouched by his hand. I need to understand, he said, his voice hollow. Everything you discovered, everything you know. Maya recounted her observations, the research she'd done, the conversations with her cousin. Thomas listened without interruption, his face growing more haggard with each revelation. I never knew, he whispered when she finished. I thought the drops were preventing seizures, protecting her brain from damage. That's what Cross told me. What exactly did you sign? Maya asked carefully. Thomas opened a drawer and removed a thick folder, the same one Maya had photographed days earlier. These consent forms. After Vivian died, Grace started having episodes. Staring spells, moments where she seemed absent. Cross said they were a type of seizure that could permanently damage her visual cortex if left untreated. He laughed bitterly. The irony. He said the medication would save her vision, when all along it was what was stealing it. Why would he do this? Maya asked. What was he gaining? Thomas's expression darkened. Data. Pure, longitudinal data on how a developing brain responds to visual suppression and recovery. Grace was the perfect subject, young, healthy, with a father desperate enough to try anything. He rubbed his face with trembling hands. Visionary Pharmaceuticals has been developing drugs for neurological conditions. This research, it would be invaluable. Worth billions. A company you own, Maya noted quietly. A subsidiary, yes. But with its own board, its own research division. Cross had autonomy. Thomas's eyes grew distant. Vivian discovered something, just before she died. She was asking questions about the pediatric trials, about consent procedures. I was too busy to listen. The implication hung in the air between them, too terrible to voice aloud. The accident. Maya began hesitantly. Was it an accident? Thomas's voice cracked. I never questioned it. The helicopter malfunction seemed tragic but explainable. Now I wonder if I've been blind in more ways than one. Over the next few days, Grace's vision continued to improve. Colors became more vivid, shapes more defined. She began to recognize faces, Maya's, her father's, Mrs. Porter's. Each new visual discovery brought a joy that transformed the child. The silent, withdrawn girl was emerging from her cocoon, unfurling into someone vibrant and curious. Maya found herself spending most of her time with Grace, no longer as a maid but as a guide to the visual world. They created a game of it, naming colors, identifying shapes, describing textures. Grace was ravenous for knowledge, for sensory input, for everything she had been denied. "What's that one?" Grace would ask, pointing to objects around the room. "That's purple," Maya would answer, "or that's round, or that's shiny." The mansion itself seemed to transform alongside Grace. Curtains that had been perpetually drawn were now open to admit sunlight. Rooms that had been shrouded in protective dimness now revealed their true colors. Dust motes danced in beams of light, no longer hidden in shadow. Even the staff moved differently, with lighter steps, with less caution. All except Mrs. Porter, who watched the changes with worried eyes. "It won't end here," she warned Maya one afternoon as they prepared lunch together. "Dr. Cross has powerful friends." And that nurse didn't leave quietly. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Porter glanced toward the doorway, lowering her voice. "Evelyn made calls before she left. I overheard her in the garden, talking about containment and damage control. She mentioned something about protocols for research compromise." A chill ran through Maya. Did she say who she was talking to? No. But she's worked for Cross longer than she's worked here. Her loyalty was never to this family. That evening, as Maya was helping Grace prepare for bed, the door to the bedroom opened. Evelyn stood in the doorway, flanked by two security guards Maya didn't recognize. "I've come for my things," Evelyn announced coldly. Thomas appeared behind her. "Make it quick," he ordered. "And stay away from my daughter." Evelyn's gaze slid to Maya, then to Grace, who was watching the scene with clear, focused eyes. Something like fear flickered across the nurse's face. "You have no idea what you've done," she said to Maya, her voice barely audible. "They won't let this stand. A child who can identify faces, who can testify to what was done to her. They'll never allow it." She gathered her belongings from the adjoining room, then paused at the door. "Leave this house before they silence you too." Like they silenced her mother. After Evelyn departed, an uneasy silence fell over the mansion. Security was doubled. Thomas rarely left the property, dividing his time between Grace and endless phone calls behind closed doors. Maya overheard fragments, legal terms, threats of exposure, mentions of board meetings and emergency sessions. 1 week after Dr. Cross's departure, Thomas called Maya to his study. Grace was having her first session with a legitimate ophthalmologist, a woman Thomas had personally vetted, who had no connections to visionary pharmaceuticals. "I need to thank you," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved my daughter from a darkness I helped create." "You didn't know," Maya said gently. "I should have." His hands clenched on the desk. "A father should know when his child is suffering. But I was too wrapped up in guilt, in grief over Vivian. I trusted the wrong people." He stood and moved to the window, looking out over the grounds where Grace would soon be able to play without pretending blindness. "The board of Visionary is in panic mode," he continued. "Cross has disappeared, probably fled the country. There are others involved, powerful people who benefited from this research. They're calling for discretion, for private settlements." He turned to face her. "They're offering millions to keep this quiet." Maya's breath caught. "And will you?" Thomas's expression was torn. "If this becomes public, the company collapses. Thousands lose their jobs. My other businesses would be tainted by association. Everything I've built, everything I could give Grace for her future, gone." "And what about the other children?" Maya asked quietly. Thomas looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "If Cross did this to Grace, with all your resources and oversight, what might he have done to children whose parents had less power? Less money? Who else is suffering in darkness right now?" Thomas sank back into his chair, the weight of this possibility visible in the slump of his shoulders. "I've started an internal investigation. There are trial records, patient files. If there are others—" The door burst open, and Grace ran in, her face alight with excitement. "Daddy. Maya. Dr. Rivera says my eyes are healthy." She says I'll be able to see perfectly with glasses. Thomas gathered his daughter into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. Over Grace's head, his eyes met Maya's, filled with conflict, with fear, with a terrible calculation of consequences. Later that evening, Maya found Grace in the garden, touching the roses her mother had planted. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, turning the child's hair to fire. "They're so beautiful," Grace whispered, carefully avoiding the thorns. "I used to smell them through my window at night. I always imagined they were red." "And were they?" "What you imagined." Grace nodded. "But better. Brighter." She turned to Maya, her eyes clear and direct. "Daddy's afraid, isn't he? I heard him talking on the phone. Someone wants him to keep secrets." Maya knelt beside her. "Sometimes adults think keeping secrets will protect the people they love. Like how I kept the secret that I could see." Grace asked. "It didn't protect me. It just kept me alone." The wisdom in the child's words struck Maya to her core. From the house, she could see Thomas watching them through the window, his face shadowed with indecision. "Maya," Grace said suddenly, "will you stay with us? Even after I can see everything." "I'll stay as long as you need me," Maya promised. "Good." Grace smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "Because I want to see everything. The whole world. And I want you to show it to me." Thomas approached across the lawn, his steps heavy with the burden of his choices. "Grace, it's getting chilly. Time to come inside." As Grace skipped ahead toward the house, Thomas lingered beside Maya. "The board is meeting tomorrow," he said quietly. "They're prepared to offer whatever it takes to handle this internally. No public exposure, no scandal." Maya watched Grace disappear into the house, her small figure silhouetted against the warm light inside. 4 or 5 years, that child had lived in artificial darkness, a prisoner of someone else's ambition. "And what does Grace get?" Maya asked. "After everything they took from her?" "Security. Protection. A future without the stigma of being a corporate victim." "And the truth about her mother? About the other children who might still be suffering?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what we're up against. These people, they have resources, influence. They could destroy us all." Maya turned to face him fully, her resolve hardening as she watched Grace press her face against the window, drinking in the sunset with newfound wonder. "Then let them come for me," she said quietly. "I won't let her live in darkness again. Not the darkness of blindness, and not the darkness of silence." Thomas stared at her, conflict warring in his eyes. Behind him, Grace waved from the window, her smile radiant in the fading light, a child awakening to a world of color after years of enforced shadow. The board meeting came and went. Thomas returned to the mansion with shadows under his eyes and tension lining his face. He had bought time, nothing more. 2 weeks to consider their offer and decide how to proceed. 2 weeks before the full weight of visionary pharmaceuticals and its powerful allies would descend upon them. Maya knew they needed more than time. They needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would make the truth impossible to bury. "I need one of the bottles," she told Thomas that evening, after Grace had gone to bed. "My cousin can analyze it, document exactly what was being given to Grace." Thomas hesitated, then unlocked the cabinet where he'd secured the remaining eye drops. "If they trace this back to your cousin, Erin knows the risks. She's worked with pharmaceutical whistleblowers before." The next morning, Maya packaged the bottle carefully, using a false return address and paying cash at the post office in town. She sent it priority overnight to Erin's university lab in Boston, with a coded message they had agreed upon: family heirloom for authentication. Urgent and confidential. While they waited for results, Grace's vision continued to improve. The ophthalmologist Dr. Rivera had prescribed glasses to correct a slight astigmatism, the only actual vision problem Grace had. The first day she wore them, Grace stood in the garden for hours, marveling at the clarity of distant trees, the definition of clouds, the intricate patterns of butterfly wings. "It's like the world got sharper," she told Maya, her face alight with wonder. Thomas watched these moments from a distance, joy and guilt warring on his face. At night, Maya would hear him pacing in his study, making calls, searching through years of company records. He was a man awakening from one nightmare only to find himself trapped in another. 3 days after sending the package, Maya received a call from Erin. "I need to speak with you in person," her cousin said, her voice tense. "Not over the phone. Can you meet me?" They arranged to meet at a cafe halfway between the Carrington estate and Boston. Thomas insisted on providing a car with a trusted driver, the first sign that he had fully committed to their cause. Erin was waiting in a back corner, a laptop and folder on the table before her. Her face was drawn with worry. "I had to use equipment from 3 different labs," she said without preamble. "Logged the tests under different project names. This isn't just dangerous, Maya, it's explosive." She opened her laptop, showing chemical analysis results. The compound is called OC-137. It's a modified version of a drug that was rejected by the FDA 5 years ago due to severe side effects. It works by temporarily suppressing signals from the optic nerve to the visual cortex, essentially creating functional blindness without damaging the eye itself. "Why would anyone develop such a thing?" Maya asked. "Originally, for treating certain types of seizures triggered by visual stimuli. But Cross modified it." Erin's voice dropped lower. "The version Grace was receiving has been engineered to last longer, with a cumulative effect. Long-term use would eventually cause permanent changes in how the brain processes visual information." Maya felt sick. "You mean it would eventually make her truly blind?" "Yes. And that was the point." Erin slid a folder across the table. "I did some digging. Cross has been running a longitudinal study tracking how the developing brain adapts to visual deprivation. Grace wasn't just a test subject, she was patient zero, the blueprint for everything that followed." Inside the folder were redacted copies of research papers, grant applications, and trial protocols. One document showed a timeline extending 15 years, with Grace's case serving as the foundation for an entire pharmaceutical research program. "There are others," Erin said quietly. "At least 7 children that I could find records of. All diagnosed with congenital visual impairment despite having structurally normal eyes." Maya's hands trembled as she closed the folder. "I need to get this to Thomas." As she left the cafe, Maya noticed a black sedan parked across the street. The driver was watching her through dark sunglasses. When she got into Thomas's car, the sedan pulled out behind them. "We're being followed," she told the driver. "I know," he replied calmly. "Mr. Carrington anticipated this. We'll take the alternate route." Back at the mansion, Maya found Thomas in his study, on the phone. His face was tight with anger. "I don't care what the board thinks," he was saying. "I want access to all the trial records. Every patient file, every consent form." He noticed Maya and gestured for her to wait. "No, that's not acceptable. I'm coming down there myself." He ended the call and turned to her. "What did you find?" Maya handed him the folder. As Thomas read through the documents, the color drained from his face. 7 children, he whispered. 7 families. "And Grace was the first," Maya added. "Patient 0. Thomas slammed his fist on the desk. "I'm meeting Cross tomorrow. He's agreed to see me, probably thinks he can still contain this." "It's too dangerous," Maya protested. "After what Erin found." "I need to hear him say it," Thomas interrupted. "I need to understand how I was so completely deceived." The next day, Thomas went alone to meet Cross at his downtown office. Maya stayed with Grace, anxiety gnawing at her with each passing hour. When Thomas finally returned, his face was ashen, his eyes burning with a cold fury she had never seen before. He admitted everything, Thomas said, pouring himself a drink with shaking hands. Not just admitted it, he was proud of it. Called it the most comprehensive study of neuroplasticity ever conducted. What exactly did he say? Thomas's laugh was hollow. That I signed away my daughter's sight. That the consent forms I thought were protecting her were actually enrolling her in an experimental protocol. When I threatened to expose him, he just smiled and said, "Who do you think approved the funding? Your board. Your company. Your signature." He drained his glass in one swallow. Cross has powerful friends, in pharmaceuticals, in medicine, in government. He made that very clear. If I go public, they'll destroy me, discredit me. They'll claim I knew all along. As if to confirm his words, Maya's phone buzzed with a news alert. A small online health publication had run a story questioning Thomas Carrington's treatment of his daughter. The article cited anonymous sources claiming Thomas had rejected conventional treatments for Grace's condition, preferring to keep her isolated for unknown reasons. By evening, more stories had appeared. Social media was buzzing with speculation. A photo of Thomas looking haggard was being shared with captions suggesting parental neglect. One particularly vicious post claimed Maya was manipulating the family for financial gain, citing her suspicious employment history and the recent death of her child. How did they get that information? Maya whispered, staring at her phone in horror. About my son? Thomas's expression darkened. They're sending a message. They can reach into our lives, expose whatever they want, twist it however they need. That night, after Grace was asleep, Thomas and Maya sat in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. Mrs. Porter had left them a pot of coffee and strict instructions to trust no one outside these walls. We need to gather everything, Thomas said. Every record, every email, every piece of evidence that shows what Cross was doing and who knew about it. Maya nodded. Erin is compiling medical documentation. She has colleagues who can verify the analysis of the eye drops. I've been going through company servers, Thomas added. There's a hidden directory of research data, years of it, all tied to Project Occlude. Grace's case file is there, along with the others. Can you access it? Not directly. They've locked me out of the system. But I wrote the original security protocols. A grim smile crossed his face. They forgot who they're dealing with. Over the next few days, a strange partnership formed between them. Thomas worked on breaching the company's security systems, extracting files that documented the full scope of Cross's research. Maya coordinated with Erin, building a medical case that proved the deliberate suppression of Grace's vision. They worked in secret, aware that the mansion was likely under surveillance. Thomas swept for listening devices daily. Maya varied her routine, never using the same phone twice for sensitive calls. They communicated through handwritten notes when necessary, burning them afterward. Through it all, Grace continued to flourish. Her world expanded daily as her vision stabilized. Dr. Rivera reported that her eyes were structurally perfect. The years of medication had left no permanent physical damage. The psychological impact was another matter, but Grace showed remarkable resilience. She's a survivor, Maya observed one afternoon, watching Grace explore the garden with newfound confidence. Thomas nodded. Like her mother. His voice caught. Vivian would never have allowed this to happen. She was asking questions about Cross's research just before she died. I found her notes hidden in a personal account I didn't know existed. Do you think, Maya couldn't finish the question, that her accident wasn't an accident? Thomas's eyes hardened. I'm becoming more certain every day. The helicopter maintenance records disappeared. The investigation was rushed. And 3 of the board members who now want me to stay quiet were with Cross the day she died. The danger around them grew more tangible. The black sedan appeared whenever Maya left the property. Anonymous emails arrived with veiled threats. Thomas's personal accounts were hacked, old messages manipulated to suggest he had known about Grace's treatment all along. One night, the security system at the mansion was disabled for 17 minutes. Nothing was taken, nothing disturbed, just a reminder that their sanctuary could be breached. We need to move faster, Thomas said, installing additional locks on Grace's bedroom door. They're getting desperate. The next morning, Maya found Grace in the sunroom, surrounded by crayons and paper. For the first time, the child was drawing, not the abstract scribbles of someone who had never seen color, but deliberate shapes and forms. What are you making? Maya asked, sitting beside her. It's us, Grace replied, pointing to 3 figures standing under a bright yellow circle. You, me, and Daddy. And that's the sun. Maya studied the drawing. The figures were simple but distinct, a tall man in a blue suit, a child with red glasses, and a woman with curly black hair. Above them, the sun radiated golden beams that touched each figure. It's beautiful, Maya said, her throat tight with emotion. I made it for Daddy. To show him I can see the colors now. When Thomas saw the drawing that evening, he stood motionless, staring at the bright yellow sun with its perfect rays. His fingers traced the childish figures, lingering on the red glasses Grace had carefully colored. She sees everything, he whispered. Not just shapes and movement, actual colors. In that moment, something shifted in Thomas's expression. The hesitation, the calculation of consequences that had tempered his actions, it all vanished, replaced by absolute resolve. "We're going public," he said, his voice steady. "All of it. Cross, the board, the trials, everything." "They'll come after us with everything they have," Maya warned. Thomas nodded, still looking at his daughter's drawing. "Let them try. I won't let another child live in darkness because I was too afraid to stand in the light." He pinned Grace's drawing to the wall of his study, a bright yellow sun shining over 3 figures, standing together against a gathering storm. "We need someone we can trust," Thomas said, pacing the length of his study. "Someone with enough journalistic integrity to handle this properly, but enough reach to make it impossible to bury." Maya nodded, thinking. "My cousin Erin mentioned a reporter who covered pharmaceutical trials gone wrong. Vanessa Chun from the Meridian. She's won awards for exposing corporate corruption." Thomas paused. "Chun broke the story on that opioid scandal last year. The pharmaceutical company tried to discredit her, but her research was impeccable." He made a decision. Contact her. Carefully. 2 days later, they met Vanessa Chen at a small diner 50 miles from the Carrington estate. Thomas had arranged elaborate precautions, separate arrivals, security sweeps, a private room with no electronic devices allowed. Chen was younger than Maya had expected, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a quiet intensity that commanded respect. "Before we start," Chen said, placing a recorder on the table, "I need to know exactly what I'm walking into. Corporate malfeasance is one thing. Criminal experimentation on children is another level entirely." "It's both," Thomas replied, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Everything we've gathered so far is on this. Medical records, research protocols, financial transfers. 7 children, including my daughter, deliberately blinded for years to gather data on neural adaptation." Chen's expression remained neutral, but her fingers tightened around the drive. "And you have proof that connects Dr. Cross directly to these actions." "Not enough. Not yet. That's where we need your help." Chen nodded slowly. "The Meridian has resources I can access. Legal teams, data analysts, medical experts who can verify your claims." She looked directly at Thomas. "But you need to understand what you're starting. Visionary Pharmaceuticals is connected to half the medical establishment in this country. Their board members sit on government committees. This won't just be a fight, it will be a war." "They've already declared war," Maya said quietly. "We're just finally fighting back." Over the next week, they worked with Chun to build an airtight case. The reporter had connections that opened doors previously closed to them, access to financial records showing irregular payments from Visionary to medical reviewers who had approved Cross's research, testimony from former lab assistants who had questioned the ethics of the trials. Most crucially, Chen tracked down Eliza Morales, whose son had been part of the same study as Grace. The woman had been fighting for years to prove that her child's blindness was induced, not congenital, but had been dismissed as paranoid by every doctor she consulted. "They chose us because we were vulnerable," Eliza explained during a video call, her voice tight with suppressed fury. "Single mother, financial struggles, language barriers. Who would believe me against someone like Dr. Cross? But I knew. A mother knows when something isn't right with her child." Her son Miguel had been receiving the same eye drops as Grace since he was 3 years old. Unlike the Carringtons, the Morales family couldn't afford to dismiss the nurse who administered them. They were trapped in a system designed to use them. "Will you testify?" Thomas asked. "On the record?" Eliza's chin lifted. "I've been waiting 5 years for someone to ask me that question." The case was building, piece by damning piece. Chin had uncovered a trail of financial transactions linking Cross's research to military contracts, applications for temporary visual suppression that went far beyond medical treatment. Thomas had managed to extract internal memos discussing the long-term neural conditioning of the trial subjects, children referred to only by numbers, their humanity erased by clinical language. "We're close," Chin told them during a late-night call. "My editor is reviewing everything. We're looking at publication next week, coordinated with a formal complaint to the Medical Ethics Board and the FDA." That same night, Thomas received an encrypted email from an anonymous board member at Visionary, someone whose conscience had finally overcome their fear. Attached were minutes from meetings where Cross had explicitly discussed using children as optimal test subjects due to their neuroplasticity and limited legal capacity to self-advocate. "This is it," Thomas said, forwarding the documents to Chun. "The smoking gun." The next evening, Thomas and Maya drove to Boston to meet with Chen's legal team. Grace remained at the mansion with doubled security and Mrs. Porter's watchful eye. Rain pounded against the windshield as they navigated the winding coastal road, discussing strategy for the coming storm. "Once this breaks, they'll try to discredit us immediately," Thomas said. "They'll claim I knew all along, that I authorized everything." "But the documents prove otherwise," Maya countered. "The consent forms were deliberately misleading. You thought you were protecting Grace from seizures. Juries can be swayed. Public opinion is fickle. We need to be prepared for." His words cut off as the steering wheel suddenly jerked under his hands. The car swerved sharply, tires losing traction on the rain-slicked road. "The brakes!" Thomas shouted, pumping the pedal frantically. It went straight to the floor, offering no resistance. The car accelerated down the steep coastal road, headlights illuminating the guardrail that separated them from a 50-foot drop to the rocks below. Thomas fought for control, downshifting manually to slow their momentum while searching for a safe path. "There." Maya pointed to a runaway truck ramp on the right, a long gravel incline designed to stop vehicles with brake failure. Thomas wrenched the wheel, sending them skidding onto the ramp. The car plowed into the deep gravel, slowing violently as stones sprayed in all directions. They lurched to a stop halfway up the incline, the engine stalling in the sudden silence. For a moment, they sat frozen, the only sound their ragged breathing and the rain drumming on the roof. "That wasn't an accident," Maya finally whispered. Thomas's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "No, it wasn't." When the police arrived, they documented the cleanly cut brake line and the missing lug nuts on the left rear wheel. "Professional job," the officer noted grimly. "Someone wanted this to look like a tragic accident." They never made it to Boston that night. Instead, they were escorted back to the mansion under police protection, the reality of what they were facing now brutally clear. This wasn't just about reputation or legal liability anymore. Someone was willing to kill to keep Cross's research from being exposed. The next morning, Chun called with news. "We're moving up publication. Today. My editor agrees. The attempt on your lives changes everything." By noon, the Meridian had published their explosive investigation, Blinded by Science: How a Pharmaceutical Giant Deliberately Impaired Children's Vision for Profit. The article laid out the entire scheme, the deceptive consent forms, the falsified medical records, the years of deliberate suppression of children's vision to gather data for military and pharmaceutical applications. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Other news outlets picked it up, adding their own reporting. Social media erupted with outrage. Visionary Pharmaceuticals stock plummeted. Dr. Cross issued a statement denying all allegations and threatening legal action for defamation. Then came the counterattack. Articles appeared questioning Thomas's mental stability following his wife's death. Sources close to the family suggested Maya had manipulated a vulnerable employer for financial gain. Medical experts with ties to Visionary appeared on news programs, explaining how the parents had misunderstood the nature of the treatments. Through it all, Grace remained a center of calm in the storm. As reporters gathered at the gates of the estate and phones rang constantly with calls from lawyers and journalists, she continued her daily exploration of the visual world, undisturbed by the chaos her truth had unleashed. On the third day after publication, as Thomas and Maya were reviewing strategy with their legal team in the study, Grace appeared in the doorway. "May I come in?" she asked politely. Thomas immediately set aside his papers. "Of course, sweetheart." Grace walked to the large windows overlooking the garden, where rain had finally given way to brilliant sunshine. Without hesitation, she pulled back the curtains fully, standing directly in the bright light that streamed through the glass. "It's warm," she said simply, her face tilted up to catch the rays. "I used to feel it sometimes, even when I couldn't see it. But feeling it and seeing it together is different." The adults watched in silence as she placed her palm against the sun-warmed glass, her small figure haloed by light. "Are those people going to make me go back to the darkness?" she asked, still facing the window. "No," Thomas said firmly, moving to kneel beside her. "Never again. I promise you that." Grace nodded, satisfied. Good. Because I want to see everything now. Even the scary parts. Her words hung in the air, a child's simple wisdom cutting through the adult complexity of legal strategies and public relations battles. The following day, Dr. Cross's lawyers reached out with a settlement offer. $20 million in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and the retraction of all public claims. The offer came with a veiled threat, documentation supposedly showing Thomas had been briefed on the true nature of the research years earlier. It's fabricated, Thomas said dismissively, pushing the papers away. Dates don't match. Signatures don't align with my calendar. They're getting desperate. But they're offering life-changing money, his lawyer pointed out. Money that could secure Grace's future, fund research into helping the other affected children. Thomas stood by the window where Grace had stood the day before. Money can't buy back her eyes, he said quietly. It can't restore the years she spent in artificial darkness. And it certainly can't buy my silence now that I know there are other children still suffering. The lawyer sighed. Then we proceed to court. The DA has agreed to bring criminal charges based on the evidence. But I have to warn you, this will be brutal. They'll attack you personally, question your parenting, suggest you're using Grace for financial gain or publicity. Let them try, Maya said, joining Thomas at the window. The truth has its own power. 2 weeks later, they arrived at the federal courthouse for the first day of hearings. The scene was chaotic, protesters with signs demanding justice, journalists shouting questions, security holding back the crowds. Thomas held Grace's hand tightly as they navigated the gauntlet, Maya close behind them. Inside the courtroom, Dr. Cross sat with an army of lawyers, his expression impassive. He didn't look at Grace, not once, as if she were merely an abstract concept rather than a child whose life he had manipulated for years. The proceedings began with opening statements. The prosecutor outlined the case methodically: fraudulent consent, deliberate medical harm, exploitation of vulnerable children. Cross's attorney countered with technical arguments about research protocols and parental authorization, painting Thomas as a neglectful father who had approved everything and was now seeking to shift blame. Evidence was presented: medical records, internal memos, financial transactions. Expert witnesses testified about the compound used in the eye drops, confirming it had no legitimate therapeutic purpose for the conditions described to the parents. Through it all, Grace sat quietly beside Thomas, occasionally whispering questions to Maya. She watched everything with clear, curious eyes, taking in the process that would determine whether justice would be served for what had been done to her. On the third day, the moment they had prepared for and dreaded arrived. The prosecution calls Grace Carrington to the stand, the DA announced. A hush fell over the courtroom. Thomas squeezed his daughter's hand one last time. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. Grace adjusted her red glasses, the same ones she had drawn in her picture. "Yes, I do, Daddy." She stood, small but determined. Instead of taking Thomas's hand, she reached for Maya's. Together, they walked toward the witness stand, past Dr. Cross and his lawyers, past the jury watching with solemn faces, past the invisible barrier between private suffering and public testimony. As Grace was sworn in, Maya stepped back, her heart pounding with fear and pride. This 8-year-old child, who had spent years pretending not to see in order to survive, was now ready to tell the world exactly what she had seen, and what had been stolen from her. The truth, at last, stepping into the light. The courtroom fell silent as Grace settled into the witness chair, her feet barely touching the floor. The prosecutor, Ms. Daniels, approached with a gentle smile. "Hello, Grace. Thank you for being here today. I know this isn't easy." Grace nodded, her red glasses catching the light from above. She looked tiny against the polished wood of the witness stand, but her posture was straight, determined. "Grace, can you tell the court how old you are?" Ms. Daniels began. "I'm 8 years old," Grace replied, her voice clear despite its softness. "And until recently, did you believe you were blind?" "Yes. The doctors told my dad I couldn't see anything. But that wasn't true." Ms. Daniels nodded. "When did you first realize you could see?" Grace's brow furrowed slightly. "I always could, a little bit. When the medicine wore off at night. But I had to pretend I couldn't." "Why did you pretend?" "Dr. Cross said it was important for the research. That I was helping other children." Grace's voice wavered slightly. "He said if I told anyone, they would take me away from my dad. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge called for order. Grace, Ms. Daniels continued carefully, I'd like you to look around this courtroom. Can you tell me what you see? Grace scanned the room slowly. I see my dad. And Maya. And Dr. Cross. Her gaze lingered briefly on the doctor before moving on. I see the jury. The flag. The big doors at the back. And can you see colors now? Yes. With my glasses, I see them very well. Ms. Daniels smiled. What color is my tie? Grace studied it for a moment. It's dark green, like the pine trees at home. And what about the judge's robe? Black. But it has some dark blue threads in it too. The prosecutor glanced up. There's a skylight above us. Can you see it? Grace tilted her head back, looking up at the rectangular window in the ceiling. Yes. The sky is very blue today. There's one small cloud on the left side. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The detail, the single cloud visible only from her angle, was too precise to be coached or guessed. Several jurors looked up to confirm, their faces registering shock when they saw the exact cloud Grace had described. Cross's attorney stood. Objection, Your Honor. This proves nothing about the defendant's actions or intent. It proves everything, Ms. Daniels countered. It proves that Grace Carrington has fully functional vision that was deliberately suppressed through medical intervention for years. The judge overruled the objection, and Ms. Daniels continued, guiding Grace through her experiences, the eye drops that made everything foggy, the fear of speaking up, the gradual realization that what was happening to her wasn't normal. When Cross's attorney cross-examined her, attempting to confuse her timeline or suggest she had been coached, Grace remained steadfast. Her answers were simple, direct, and devastatingly clear. Did your father know you could see? The defense attorney asked. No, Grace replied without hesitation. He was sad all the time because he thought I was blind. I wanted to tell him, but I was scared. Scared of what? Doctor. Cross said bad things would happen if anyone found out. He said it every time he visited. By the time Grace stepped down from the witness stand, returning to Maya's waiting embrace, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted palpably. The clinical detachment with which the defense had approached the case had crumbled in the face of a child's simple truth. The prosecution's next witness was Dr. Erin Cole, who presented her analysis of the eye drops and explained in scientific detail how they functioned to suppress visual processing. She was followed by a former lab assistant from Visionary Pharmaceuticals who testified about altered data and discarded results that didn't fit the desired outcome. We were instructed to report only the successful suppression cases, the assistant explained. Children who experienced side effects or whose vision couldn't be fully suppressed were removed from the study and their data destroyed. And what happened to those children? Ms. Daniels asked. The assistant looked down. 3 died from complications. Their deaths were classified as resulting from pre-existing conditions unrelated to the study. The courtroom erupted. Parents in the gallery began sobbing. The judge called repeatedly for order. When calm was finally restored, the prosecution presented their most damning evidence, Cross's personal research journal, obtained through a warrant after the initial charges were filed. The journal detailed his methodology with clinical precision, including notes on how to select compliant families and how to ensure children's silence through calculated intimidation. Most disturbing were his notes on Grace. Subject 0 continues to provide optimal baseline data. Father remains unaware of visual capacity. Recommend continued isolation to prevent discovery. Cross sat stone-faced as his words were read aloud, but the jury's expressions reflected growing horror and disgust. Several couldn't look at him directly anymore. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Testimony from medical experts, parents of other affected children, and former Visionary employees painted a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse disguised as medical research. Through it all, Thomas sat beside Maya, listening to the full scope of what had been done to his daughter and others like her. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Dr. Leonard Cross was found guilty on all counts: fraud, medical malpractice, child endangerment, and criminal experimentation. The judge, her voice tight with controlled fury, sentenced him to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole. The court rarely sees crimes that combine such calculated cruelty with such profound betrayal of trust, she stated. You used your medical knowledge not to heal but to harm the most vulnerable among us, and you did so for profit and professional advancement. There can be no greater perversion of the healing arts. As Cross was led away in handcuffs, he never once looked at Grace or the other children whose lives he had manipulated. His expression remained one of clinical detachment, as if the proceedings were happening to someone else entirely. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Visionary pharmaceutical stock collapsed as investors fled. The board members who had known about Cross's research resigned in disgrace. Federal investigations were launched into other pharmaceutical trials involving children. Medical ethics boards across the country began reviewing their oversight procedures. Thomas held a press conference on the courthouse steps, Grace standing beside him in her red glasses, Maya just behind them. I failed my daughter, he said, his voice breaking. I trusted the wrong people and didn't ask the right questions. For that, I will spend the rest of my life making amends, not just to Grace, but to all the children who suffered while I remained silent. He looked down at his daughter. But today, justice has been served, and the truth has finally come to light. In the weeks that followed, the story dominated headlines. Other families came forward with similar experiences. Children diagnosed with conditions they didn't have, experimental treatments disguised as standard care, parents manipulated through fear and false hope. A support foundation was established, funded by Thomas's personal fortune. Its mission was twofold: to provide resources for affected families and to advocate for stricter oversight of pediatric clinical trials. One quiet morning, while Grace was working with her new tutor, Maya asked Thomas for a few days' leave. There's something I need to do, she explained. Someone I need to visit. Thomas understood immediately. Take all the time you need. Maya traveled back to Detroit, to the small cemetery where her son was buried. She hadn't been there since the funeral, the pain too raw, the loss too overwhelming. Now she stood before the simple headstone, placing a small bouquet of sunflowers against the marble. I found my way back to the light, she whispered. Just like you always said I would. She told him about Grace, about Thomas, about the battle they had fought together. As she spoke, the crushing weight she had carried for so long began to lift slightly. Not disappearing, grief never truly vanished, but transforming into something she could carry differently. When she returned to the Carrington estate 3 days later, she found it transformed. The heavy drapes that had once covered every window had been removed entirely. Sunlight streamed through sparkling clean glass, illuminating rooms that had been shadowed for years. Grace had converted the solarium into an art studio, its glass walls and ceiling creating a cathedral of light. Paintings covered every surface, explosions of color created by a child discovering the visual world with unbridled joy. Blues and yellows dominated, the colors of sky and sun, of freedom and illumination. Maya. Grace called when she entered, rushing over with paint-smudged hands. Look what I made today. She proudly displayed her latest creation, a portrait of the three of them standing together outside the courthouse, surrounded by rays of golden light. It's beautiful, Maya said, genuinely moved by the child's talent. The figures were still childlike in execution, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. You've captured us perfectly. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink, Thomas found Maya on the terrace, watching Grace in the garden below. The child was examining flowers with a magnifying glass, delighting in details invisible to the naked eye. The tutor says she's advancing at an extraordinary rate, Thomas said, joining Maya at the railing. Her brain is making up for lost time, forming new connections, absorbing everything she sees. Maya nodded. She's remarkable. Because of you. Thomas's voice was soft with emotion. You gave her light back. Maya shook her head, her eyes never leaving Grace. No. She was always meant to see. Someone just tried to stop her. She turned to face him. All I did was notice what everyone else had been trained to ignore. Thomas was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what comes next. The foundation will need leadership, someone who understands both the medical and human sides of what these families are facing. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Carrington? Maya asked with a small smile. I'm offering you a purpose, he corrected. If you want it. Below them, Grace had abandoned her magnifying glass and was running barefoot through the garden, arms outstretched as if to embrace the world itself. Her laughter floated up to them on the evening breeze, the sound of pure, unbridled joy. "She'll need you," Thomas added quietly. "We both will." Maya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched as Grace spun in circles, face tilted toward the setting sun, light glinting off her hair and glasses. The child who had lived in enforced darkness now danced in the golden hour, unafraid of shadows because she had survived them. "Yes," Maya finally said, her decision made. "I'll stay." As twilight deepened around them, Grace continued her barefoot dance through the garden. Light clung to her, the last rays of sunset catching in her hair, illuminating her small figure against the deepening blue of evening. She moved with the freedom of someone who had been liberated from a prison she never deserved, her joy a defiance against those who had tried to limit her world. Above her, the first stars appeared, pinpoints of light in the gathering darkness, distant but clear, visible at last to eyes that had always been meant to see them.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.